Hey everybody, what's up? It's Not Newbie, back again with yet another video, and today I'm going to be talking about the movie Hurry Up Tomorrow. Now, this is the infamous Weeknd movie. It's only infamous if you've actually heard of the movie. Apparently, no one who saw this movie liked it, even though I did see it get an interesting spread on Letterboxd as far as how the reviews went. I went to go see this movie in Dolby, which, by the way, was not a great idea, especially because I didn't know this until afterwards, but the movie wasn't actually made specifically for Dolby. And so the interesting thing about Dolby cinemas is that they have a 12 or so bit dynamic range, which is a lot higher than the standard 10-bit HDR that you'll get in most HDR experiences. What this meant was that there were certain colors that weren't shown correctly. When I watched this in Dolby, what this meant was that I would be looking at the shadows and you'd see a lot of banding and weird stuff in the shadows. The thing is, this didn't happen for every single shot where you saw shadows. This only happened on certain shots, and I found out later that it was because those certain shots were done with certain cameras, because some cameras had a certain level of HDR that the other cameras didn't. It was kind of weird how they processed everything. But all of that to say, I saw this movie in Dolby. It was not the wisest thing for me to do, to go see this movie in Dolby, although it was still quite an interesting experience. I will say, to be fair, that the directing from Trey Edward Schultz was fantastic. And so it was quite a beautiful film to behold in the Dolby cinema. You know, Dolby, very much like IMAX, is one of the largest screens that you'll see at a theater. So, you know, to see that on a huge screen, not horrible, but yes, fantastic visuals, some really cool camera tricks, you know, moving around and spinning around. Some people found it a little bit repetitive, but it was hard for me to get the feeling that those effects and tricks were repetitive when they're things that we don't usually see in cinema. So I greatly appreciated those. Also, just like the use of the color, lighting, all of that, generally speaking, felt very cinematic in a way that the majority of Hollywood films just don't anymore, which is quite unfortunate. I will say that the other bright spot in this film was Jenna Ortega. Jenna Ortega, like, she came to work and she truly clocked in. Like, she put in what is probably the best performance I've ever seen out of her. Now, to be fair, I've only seen Jenna Ortega in Wednesday as well as Death of a Unicorn. She was fine in those movies. I think her acting in Death of a Unicorn was a lot more one note, but in this movie, she was fantastic. I was really surprised and impressed by how great she acted in this film, especially compared to all the other actors. And I'll get more to Abel's acting later on in this review, but generally speaking, the acting in this movie wasn't horrible, and so to see her acting so well in this movie really just impressed me a whole lot. But yes, to go on to the Weeknd's acting in this movie for the most part was okay. Now, to be fair, the moments in which he was acting okay were moments where, you know, he didn't really have to portray that much emotion, which makes a lot of sense. You know, walking and talking and singing on the stage, you know, getting ready for his performances, you know, just like all of the normal, ordinary day-to-day things. Abel actually does pull those sequences off. I will say, and now we're going to get into the bad here, that the Weeknd's acting at the very beginning when he's singing it at a piano, I didn't really buy it for some reason, which is kind of weird. I bought all of the other singing moments that he had in the film, but just that opening one, I didn't really buy. Also, there were a couple of moments where the Weeknd's acting really wasn't great. And yes, I know that there's that one moment that's been going viral where he's telling Jenna Ortega's character, and yes, the writing of this is so bad that I don't even remember what her name is, even though she's the most interesting part of the movie, and I'll get to that later as well. But the Weeknd's character is telling Jenna Ortega's character basically to go away and stop bothering me. And yeah, that scene was like a little bit cringy. Yes, I did hear some teenagers laughing in the cinema, but that actually wasn't really that bad. It was mostly actually him being given poor lines, his acting failing to elevate the material that he was given. The real bad moment of acting that we see out of the Weeknd in this movie is towards the end where, and I'm not going to spoil anything even though this is kind of spoiled in the trailers, he's in a room and he should be in great distress, right? You know, he should be fearing for his life. There's a presumption that he's going to be killed, and you know, as he's here in this moment, yes, he's shouting and he's screaming, of course, that all makes sense. While he's in this moment shouting and screaming, he mostly just seems like annoyed, like he just wants to get up and go do something else, and this is just like, you know, very inconvenient for him. He's just like, come on, just let me leave. Versus him actually being genuinely afraid. That fear is just something that he did not do a good job of portraying in this movie. Now, thankfully for him, he didn't really have to do that very much in this movie, but in the scenes where he did, it just was not great at all. But yeah, moving towards the writing in this movie really is what killed it. And here's the shocking thing. And here's the sad thing about the fact that this movie didn't have good writing. If you go online, go to Wikipedia, look at the budget for this film. The budget is only $15 million. And for a $15 million film, this really looks like it cost maybe 10 times that much, if not more than that. And I was just thoroughly impressed. But the problem is the writing is just bad. It didn't even feel rushed. It just felt like a first draft, and whoever was making the movie didn't bother to ask for more drafts to get a more final script. The writing was extremely slow. Not enough happened in this movie. I actually kind of treated it like a meme because, you know, the movie is over an hour and a half long. But if you go into Wikipedia and you go to the plot where it shows all the spoilers and everything that happens in the movie, it's literally only 3 or 4 paragraphs long, and those are not even long paragraphs. That shows just how little happens in this movie. I think at the core of this, there is a relatively interesting story about, you know, the stress of trying to tour, how personal life can affect your ability to be a performing musician, and sort of like the stresses of fractious and toxic relationships. Also sort of just like the relationship between the artist and the music. There are all types of interesting themes in this film, but they just never got properly fleshed out, and the pacing for the writing was extremely laborious. For the runtime of this film, we really should have gotten more out of the story and more out of the characters. Also, you know, another sign of the poor writing is that I just don't know any of the characters' names. And this is not just because the characters were forgettable or because, you know, it's been so long since I saw the movie. No, this was me coming out of the theater. I did not remember like a single character's name, I don't think. And this is because the way that they wrote the dialogue, the characters weren't even referring to each other by name very much, which seems like an oversight to me. Generally, if you're watching a show or you're watching a movie, you get to know the characters' names by hearing them called by their names, but we just didn't really get a whole lot of that. I think that the person that The Weeknd sort of ends up with throughout the course of much of the movie is Anima. I don't even know if Anima introduces herself as Anima at any point in this movie. Like, honestly, to get the names of all the characters, it probably would be best to literally go to the Letterboxd or Wikipedia articles for this movie instead of trying to kind of glean the names from the movie, because, you know, best believe me, you're not going to get those just by observing the film itself. So, is this a movie that I would recommend people watch? Not really, no, unless you're a massive Jenna Ortega stan and really want to see her put in some masterful work in front of the silver screen. Otherwise, I don't really think that there's very much here that you truly need to observe, because while yes, Trey Edward Schultz's directing here is fantastic, there are similar visuals that you can get from much better pieces of work, specifically Euphoria, and I saw the TV Glow. It really does feel like Sam Levinson and Marcel Rev's influence is being felt through films like this, but honestly, that doesn't really mean much if the movie itself isn't really that great, and unfortunately, that's what we're getting here. So if you would ask me, hey, should I go watch this movie? I pretty much would tell you no, and that kind of is reflected in the rating. I ended up giving this movie a 4 out of 10 rating on Letterboxd. But hey, that's what I thought about this movie. I'd like to know what you thought about this movie, so please leave your thoughts down in the comments below. I'd love to hear what you guys have to say about this, and yeah, I guess I'll see you guys in another video if you want to see another one of my videos.